In the video that we have, there's about 10 to 15 minutes of run time in which they are pursuing Mr. Hobel, and the chase did go into another county and then returned back to Lawrence County, where it ultimately concluded on I-376.
And while that radio transmission is going back and forth to the police officers, do they know it's this guy in the car?
Not initially, but once a license plate was identified, then they had an idea who was driving.
And then do they say to themselves, we know this is a known felon in our area?
I'm not sure if that's what the police officers did. I do know that just because the plate comes back to an individual, most officers, they're not going to make that leap of faith to assume that the person that's registered is actually the person that's driving for a variety of reasons. But his identity was not confirmed until the conclusion of the arrest.
What was the time frame between when the officers stopped the vehicle and the officer who ended up shooting through the windshield? What was the time frame between when that happened and when the actual shooting occurred?
It was about 15 to 20 minutes. The actual...
No, I'm sorry, 15 to 20 minutes while the car was stopped and they were...
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question. In terms of the time frame, it was less than a couple minutes. When the officer actually got out of the car, the still image that I provided to you was the first image that the officer saw, and that was Mr. Hobel holding the gun to the officer's head, or holding the gun to the victim's head. It was at that point that, however long it took him to, once he exited the vehicle, he recognized that the suspect was holding the firearm, and then he worked his way around to the front of the car to make sure that this person was not in the line of fire if gunfire would have resulted. Once he got towards the front of the vehicle, that's when Mr. Hobel began saying, I'm going to kill her, or I'm going to kill you, and that's when the officer pulled the trigger.
Was that gun loaded that he had?
I don't have any of the ballistic results back or reports on the suspect's firearm. All I can tell you is that we do have the firearm, and I don't have the make, model, or serial number of the firearm.
Was he on that car? Should we walk through the entire time with any questions that you guys had about what may have transpired prior to them pursuing him?
She eventually was. It took a long time to get her to calm down. Obviously, she had been through a very traumatic experience, and it took several minutes for her to release the police officer, who I believe she was looking at as her savior. Eventually, we were able to separate them. I mean, she was truly holding him like you would hold a child, and when we finally got her calm, we did get her into another police vehicle. Made sure that we had the heat on. It was very cold that evening, and she eventually became more comfortable and then began to fully cooperate with law enforcement officers.
Did you answer this, but how many shots were fired? Were they all through the front windshield?
There were multiple shots that were fired directly through the front windshield. Fortunately, the officer who was involved in the shooting is a highly trained officer who is a member of the special response team for the city of Newcastle, and as I previously stated, just completed a hostage rescue vehicle training, and the grouping on the shots left no doubt that he was going to hit what he was intending, and that the passenger was safe.
Was the robbery that the party suspect in the one in Taylor Township?
There were a couple different robberies that they got the information of this suspicious car. I don't know if it was that night. I do believe it was prior to that as well.
Where was Hobel struck?
He was struck in the abdomen area, pretty much from the rib cage down, which is really consistent with the positioning of the officer and the discharge of the firearm, given the fact that he was in the driver's seat seated, holding the gun, and the officer is firing at a downward angle.
You said there were multiple shots fired, but you don't have an exact number?
I don't yet, because we have not done the weapon count, the round count for the officer.
Do you know how many times the victim was shot?
Don't have the medical reports yet, so I don't know the specific number. Sometimes when an individual gets shot, the bullet doesn't always travel in a straight line, and it may do some collateral damage. So until I actually receive a medical report that can explain to me how many times he was actually struck by the bullets, I don't want to guess.
Can you say what officer fired the shot?
I cannot. The officer's name and identity are protected. At some point it may be released, but not at the present.
Was the officer who pulled the girl out the same officer officer that fired the shot?
I cannot confirm that, and any confirmation of that may lead to the identity of the officer. There was only one officer that fired, yes. In fact, it was the only officer in position who could have made that shot. If any other officer, and there were other officers there, Shenango Police, they actually were covering one of the flanks. The Pennsylvania State Police was covering the officer and the hostage. That officer was the only one in position to actually take that shot.
So from the video you showed, it was obviously the officer behind the second.
It's a fair assumption to say that it was an officer that was in front of the vehicle.
You said that you haven't yet finished a final determination of whether or not the officer's actions were justified, but it sounds like based on what you're saying today, in terms of thanking or, being grateful
Sure.
that you had previous training and the shots were all centered and worked the way they should have been, it sounds like it's going to be justified.
That's a fair assumption, but before any district attorney renders a final decision, I want to make sure that I have all of the documentation. And at present, as you can see from some of the questions that have been answered, I'm still missing some pieces that will come in time, and then I'll be able to render a final decision in the matter.
Again, which law enforcement agency does this officer belong to?
The Newcastle City Police Department.
Can you say how many years experience, or more than 5 or more than 10 or something like that?
I can say he's an experienced police officer. Again, I really don't want to narrow it down just for protection of the officer. And I can also say that one of the concerns that we have in any type of officer shooting case is to make sure that the officer receives any treatment that they may need, whether it's counseling, whether it's psychological services. That is all available, because not only is this a horrific and traumatic event for the person being shot, but for the officer who had to do the shooting. There's no police officer that wants to shoot someone or discharge their firearm in the performance of their duties. That is a situation that is forced upon him or her. And in this particular case, we wanted to make sure that the officer has whatever services that he or she needs.
Are there any test alcohol drugs that you guys perform or know results of whether these individuals inside the vehicle were impaired at the time? Is also
Those, I will have the answers to those. I just do not have them now. Those would be medical records that would come from the hospital, and we don't have any of them yet.
any other things found in the car?
I can tell you that the firearm was found. Other than that, I don't have the results of the search warrant that was issued in the case. I can say that the reason why we have these press conferences when I don't have all of the information is I do understand that there is the tension between the media and law enforcement, and I don't mean tension between the relationships. I mean tension in the sense that you want to provide your readership and your membership who watches your television programs to as much information as you can in a timely manner. At the same time, there's the interest on our part to make sure that we do everything right, that we dot the I's and we cross the T's. And so this was sort of the fair compromise to get you as much information as we could, with the understanding that we can't make a final determination until we have everything.
Can Chief Salem speak to the officer shooting and the training he went through and how it applied in this instance?
Sure, if you have any specific questions, Chief Salem is here. This is Chief Bobby Salem. He's the chief of the Newcastle Police Department.
What's the question?
Just the officer's training, they said he'd been just finished this training and it went into use during this instance.
The week prior to this incident, the NCPD did conduct vehicle takedown, hostage rescue situations from vehicles. This officer was part of that training. As the district attorney said, he's part of the tactical team for our department. So he was just trained in this exact scenario.
Do you know if this officer's been involved in any other shootings in his career?
I don't believe so, no.
the suspect fired the shots?
We do not have any information that the suspect fired any shots. My contention, and it's only my contention, would be no. It's on video. He did have the gun placed to her head. So if there had been a shot, it would have been probably a fatal injury. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Is that the procedure when someone's holding a gun to somebody else that you have a chance you get a shot off?
Yeah, there is a duty and obligation for police officers to protect the life of other individuals, whether they're innocent, whether it's a fellow police officer, whether it's just a bystander person that happens to be there. A police officer has a duty to protect their life. Some people may ask, well, why didn't you wait to see what the man in the car did? Well, you would never wait to see what the person in the vehicle was going to do when he has a gun pointed to someone else's head. The police officer is placed in a terrible situation where he has to make, or she has to make, an instantaneous call to protect the life of another person. And so that officer, in this particular case, made that call, and we believe saved the life of this young woman.
Do you
So
think
when
it,
you watch the video, do you believe, you watched the video, so do you believe it went by the book?
From what I could tell of both the investigation from start to finish, from Shenango Township's initiation of the stop, to the pursuit, to the request for assistance from the Newcastle Police Department and the Pennsylvania State Police, for the entire pursuit throughout the counties, the communications that occurred between them trying to protect any other bystanders that were on the road, up until the moment where they boxed the car in and then got out. I believe that once the officer was faced with that still picture that I showed you, that image of the man holding the gun to the woman's head, I believe that after I get all of the documentation, then I'll make a final determination on whether or not the shoot was legal.
You talked about in the radio transmissions among the officers as the pursuit was ongoing, that they talked about their concerns that, passing motorists might be in danger, and they talked about calling off a pursuit were that to be the case. Was there discussion or any supervisors on the radio that said, hey, this guy is wanted for a dangerous felony robbery, or maybe not, maybe it's a burglary, I don't know the circumstances that could be used for, but did that come into play in terms of the pursuit being initiated in the first place?
It would not have come in for the purposes of making the determination, because the officers would not have had that information at that time. His background was the background that was produced by the district attorney's office after we ran his background, after he was a known person. The fact that when they ran the car, it came back titled to him, the officers would not have had all of the background. They just would have known that this vehicle was similar to a vehicle that they believed was involved in a robbery in another jurisdiction.
So should they have started a pursuit in the first place then?
Well, when the officer actually did not start the pursuit immediately. What happened was the officer drove past the vehicles, recognized that this vehicle was similar to a vehicle that was used in the robbery. He had turned his vehicle around, and then when presumably Mr. Hobel saw the officer turn his vehicle around and get behind him, he then blew through the stop sign and accelerated at a high rate of speed. At that point, the officer activated his lights, and that just became a routine traffic stop for someone who just committed a traffic violation. However, that individual, once the lights were turned on, Mr. Hobel did not pull over, and then it became a high-speed chase through multiple counties.
was the gun stolen?
Again, I don't have that information.
Do you think that the shots that were fired were by chance or precision, that the offender didn't die because of the number of shots fired?
I can't really speak to that. All I can tell you is that the training that officers receive when it comes to using deadly force is you use the force that is necessary to terminate the threat. And when I say terminate, I don't mean end the life of, I mean terminate the threat, so that that individual is no longer a threat to other citizens, to the officer, or to themselves. So I believe that the officer acted upon his training and fired several shots in as tight a grouping as possible to neutralize the threat. I can tell you that the officer did not empty his clip. This was not a situation where the officer just pulled the trigger until the magazine was empty. This officer pulled the trigger until the threat had been neutralized and then stopped, exactly like they're trained.
Does Hobel have a drug problem?
I'm sorry?
Does Hobel have a drug problem?
I don't know whether or not he has a drug problem. I can just tell you that he does have several felony convictions in the past. They are not drug related though; they are violent crimes.
But he likes to rob places.
He is a suspect in a robbery. I can't say that we don't have a conviction. He's not pled guilty to any robberies yet, but he is a suspect in those robberies.
What charges will he face, or how?
He's facing right now aggravated assault, recklessly endangering. He's a felon not to possess. He's facing a slew of felony and misdemeanor charges.